The fifth panel of the Beyond the Impasse conference shifted the discussion from the values of DEI and the view of social relations it presupposes to the ways DEI attempts to respond to social injustice and to express the sense of injustice. Presenters responded to the question, how should we lament? Drawing on the resources of political science, philosophy, and the Catholic theological tradition.
Lincoln, in his second inaugural, offers what I think could be considered a kind of civic lament, inching towards national reconciliation by underscoring the similarity and mutual responsibility of both North and South for the Civil War, while also presenting the war as a providential event. All dreaded it, all sought to avert it, and yet the war came. He uses that passive tense, and yet the war came. Lincoln's masterful rhetoric expresses lamentation not just for slavery and the war, but for the suffering of the whole American people through their seeming offenses against God and against each other. And Lincoln ends his address urging Americans to strive on to finish the work, with malice towards none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right. I think this is a really masterful example of a kind of civic lament, and Lincoln, speaking as it were for the nation, laments what was, what is, and encourages us to imagine what yet might be. So in the midst of suffering and in the midst of breakdown of political friendship, he invites us to envision a future, to dream of a different future world. Jim Caesar, in a book called Liberal Democracy and Political Science, this was written in the 90s, so way before our debates about liberalism, sort of post-liberalism, illiberalism, et cetera, makes this remark that I think is helpful in this context, that those who worry about the strength or health of liberal democracy might want to think about whether we've demanded too much of a legal constitutional framework and not enough of ourselves and our own moral character to carry that out. This is not to say that lamentation, I want to be clear, should not be expressed politically. Peaceful protests are one example. In our country's earlier days, the Continental Congress, Presidents Washington, Adams, Taylor, and Lincoln declared days of fasting, penance, and prayer. Thanksgiving is one legacy of this, though we seem to have forgotten this other side of fasting, penance, and prayer. The lamentation can manifest itself politically in a variety of ways, but as we think about what lamentation means for politics, we should call the limits of politics the complexity of rendering justice well, and embrace the opportunity to fill the gap between what is and what ought to be with other kinds of virtues that build up the virtue of justice. Humility, mercy, grace, charity, and I want to emphasize, since many of us academics, and we're here talking about ideas, not just intellectualizing things, but actually doing things together. Tocqueville has this wonderful line in Democracy in America that sentiments and ideas are renewed, the heart grows larger, and the mind expands by the reciprocal action of men upon one another.
Lament, just insofar as it is lament, is silent about whether the cause of the evil is someone else's wrongdoing, my own, a mere misfortune, or something else entirely. The situation that evokes lament simply cries out for remedy. Next, I'd like to turn us to lament as a response to the social wounds that DEI advocacy aspires to remedy. And here the notion of vicarious contrition could be of some use, I want to suggest. Because of the difficulty that surrounds the question of how best to help mend the damage done by the large-scale injustices of the past. In cases like these, we often lack immediate clarity about how exactly to think about complicity in such wounds, or responsibility for helping to remedy them. The opportunity to express vicarious contrition enables us to respond constructively to our social wounds in one way which bypasses intractable questions like these. After all, you might well think that while I can lament the wrongdoings of others, there's no place for me to express contrition over it, or the purpose of amendment and reparation that accompanies contrition. The thought goes, contrition is a form of sorrow that responds exclusively to my own deliberate faults. But there is a third possibility. My lamentation can express vicarious contrition. I have the opportunity to express sorrow over the wrongdoings of others in a way that freely and willingly takes up responsibility for playing some part in making amends, regardless of where precisely the calculus of obligation lands on the matter. In this form, Lamentation becomes a work of mercy, understood in Catholic terms as love in response to the evil suffered by another. Considered as an aspect of the virtue of love, mercy, misericordia, consists in having a heart, a cor, for the misery, the miseria of others. And it's worth noting on this point that on some accounts at least, the expression of vicarious contrition plays a key role in the redemptive meaning of Christ's sufferings. To take one example, consider Thomas Aquinas' remark that in the Passion, Christ grieved not only over the loss of his own bodily life, but also over the sins of all others. And this grief in Christ surpassed all grief of every contrite heart, both because it flowed from a greater wisdom and charity, by which the pang of contrition is intensified, and because he grieved at the one time for all sins. Christ's outward sufferings, Aquinas is suggesting, profound though they are, pale in comparison to the inward sorrow of Christ's vicarious contrition. And if that compassionate grief ranges over all sins, as Aquinas puts it, then that certainly includes the sins and the social wounds that DEI advocacy aims to redress. In Christ, God shares in the anguish of every afflicted heart. Seen in this light, joining in lamentation over our social wounds can be a form of the kind of redemptive reconciling work that these wounds call for.
Gibson is right to underscore the affective dimension of lament. The word from the Latin lamentum means wailing, moaning, weeping. Doubtless this refers to the expression of sorrow. Yet, while Gibson points toward a salutary response to certain evils, I think he overlooks the forensic connotations of accusation, which are essential to the biblical aspect of lament, and therefore also the subsequent Catholic traditions of lament. Now, I can't make good on that point here by trotting through a history of the application of a term. But what I can do is give a couple of what I think are illustrative examples to illustrate what the Bible and the Catholic tradition means by lament. So start with the case of Job. His cries of lament do not merely express an otherwise attitude over the devastation of great goods that are dearest to the human heart. They do this, but they do not do this only. Job's anguish is more than an otherwise attitude. Job addresses his lament to God, who he's not afraid to accuse of neglect and perhaps even injustice. We read in chapter 7, "Have I become a burden to you? Tell me what charges you have against me. Does it please you to oppress me, to spurn the work of your hands?" There's an expression of lament that involves an accusation, a rather bold one, where God is now in the seat of a defense, and a lot to say about that.
The Beyond the Impasse conference was a success, and we're now at work preparing the next round of working groups and seminars to connect our work with leaders in the worlds of business and education. If you would like to support the Beyond the Impasse project or are interested in learning more, please use the links on display here or in the video description below. Thanks for your support.